To mark our inaugural AI Week in Focus here at The Media Leader, we have a little something special for you. Believe it or not, we're launching our first ever mini-series here on the Media Leader podcast. Over the next few weeks, the Media Leader's former editor-in-chief and my former boss, Omar Oakes, will be joined by Hamish Nicklin to argue over how much AI is really set to disrupt the creative industries. In lieu of our standard interview this week, Omar and Hamish will be presenting the series' pilot episode, and you can be on the lookout for new episodes of Believe It or Not in your feed or on the Media Leader at uk.themedialeader.com on Thursdays. We'll be back with our usual slate on the Media Leader podcast next Monday, but for now, take it away, Omar.
Most AI podcasts will tell you one of two things. Either AI is going to save the world, unlock human potential, cure diseases, fix the broken bits of capitalism, or it's going to end it, take your job, homogenise culture, hand power to a handful of companies that already have too much of it. We think both of these takes are lazy, and we've been arguing about it in public for a few months, so we decided instead we'd rather do it somewhere with better audio. This is Believe It or Not. I'm Omar Oakes, an ad and media industry journalist and now consultant. I've spent a decade and more reporting in this industry at places like Campaign and the Media Leader, where I was founding editor-in-chief, and now I work independently. With me is Hamish Nicklin. I'm going to let you describe yourself. Hamish, who are you?
Thanks, Omar. So I'm Hamish Nicklin, 25 years in media with the last 10 or 15 years or so of it running fairly big commercial operations, either back in the early days of Google, then The Guardian, and then as CEO of media at Dentsu. And I left Dentsu about 2.5, 3 years ago and took what was supposed to be a short sabbatical to lick my wounds, relax a bit and get that nervous system back into good running order. But then I started playing with AI tools and I have never gone back. I realized what I wanted to do was build the tools I wish I'd had when I was running those businesses. And I wanted to build things, not manage things. So I set up my existing company, Agent Flow, with my co-founder, Stephen, who is the technical genius behind everything that we do.
Yeah, so interesting journey that you've been on. I think a lot of people out there will be interested in AI, depending on what they're doing for work and what their companies are doing with AI. They're going to have very different experiences. And we'll explain how we got to this in a few minutes, but I think it's important to say from the outset, this podcast is where you are in the thick of it. You have been doing this as part of your business. I am a journalist who's increasingly writes about AI in media for obvious reasons, and I'm quite skeptical about it. And there are going to be lots of areas in which we disagree, but also hopefully a lot of areas in which people will see the practical value and what is real and what is frankly bullshit. Just to explain what the day-to-day is like in terms of what is Agent Flow. I mean, I see a lot of people who are AI consultants nowadays. I mean, what makes you different?
Well, look, what we do in our business is we help people just figure out where AI fits, and then we build it for them. And there are times when, this is something I'm going to want us to really get into, because what a lot of people do is they just see an automation opportunity, tell the client how they could automate it, and then they build it for them. And frankly, yes, we do that. But my problem with that 9 times out of 10 is that's just bolting AI onto what is almost certainly an already shit process. What we actually try and do is sit down with them and say, look, you've got this brand spanking new technology, this enormous intelligence at your disposal. Do you really want to continue doing the things you've always done just with another brain? Or do you want to pause for a second, take this opportunity to radically transform and think about what work actually is and how you deliver what you're promising to your shareholders and to your customers? That to me is a much more interesting conversation to have with clients about AI than just, hey, you could automate that process. Let's do it for you.
Well, so here's my honest version of what this show is going to be. So Hamish, as you've heard, he's the AI evangelist. He's built things with it. He's betting a whole company on it. I'm a skeptic by trade. I think any good journalist should have a default skepticism. I've for more than a decade reporting on this industry. I've tried to, as I see fit, call, as the Americans say, call balls and strikes on industry narrative and what's BS and what's not. But with the AI, I think it's fascinating. I've written about this already in terms of my own journey. As I might talk about on the next episode, I've transitioned from using one thing, ChatGPT, to another, Claude, and it's already kind of shaken up the Etch-a-Sketch and in my brain and complicated my thinking. So I'm definitely not a convert. I'm a work in progress, I think it's fair to say. And I think that's going to be, I think a lot of people out there should share that seeing that gap between somebody who's in the trenches building the future and someone else whose job is to ask hard questions about it and just want something real. I'm not, from the outset, I'm not believing this whole super intelligence thing and that, somebody's out there building the Terminator and all our jobs are going to disappear overnight. I just, no, it's just not going to happen, right? But there is something there. And I really want to help people along that journey of what's actually actionable and real and useful versus pie in the sky, la la la. And we see this on social media. I mean, Hamish, you actually made a point on LinkedIn recently about how polarized the conversation around AI has become online. I mean, talk about that.
Yeah, that's the thing that drives me mad. Doesn't seem to be a space for people to have a conversation and come together to say, look, can both of those things that you describe be true? Like when I look at LinkedIn, people are either being called Luddite doomongers or evangelical Pollyannas. And most of the time, I'm the one being called an evangelical Pollyanna. But there's nowhere to have an actual conversation about this context and this subject that I think is probably one of the most important things humanity is going to have to deal with. And I don't think it's like evangelical or Pollyanna-ish to say that. Like when I play with the technology here and I can see the power of this thing, the implications of what it might become and what it might do genuinely are pretty large, I think. And I don't say that lightly. And I'm looking at you, Climate Crisis, when I say that I think this is one of the most important things humanity is going to have to deal with. And so what I would love this to be, this podcast, is a space where we're not trying to prove each other right or wrong, right? We're not debating, we're discussing, because I guess a debate, which is what you see happen so often on LinkedIn and kind of what we did when we first met to talk about this subject, was it implies there's winners and losers, whereas a discussion is something that allows you to go deeper. It implies that people will go with the flow, they'll change their minds, they'll go down different paths, they'll get persuaded. It's more collaborative and more open, and it's usually where people find solutions as opposed to a debate, which is just, I'm right, you're wrong. And I think this subject is so important, and it's changing all the time, that a space where two people who may inherently sit on one side of the fence more comfortably than the other come together to discuss, and they don't dig themselves in. They're open to listening to the other side and can bring conversations to the surface and let listeners make their minds up.
Yeah, I mean, it is the nature of social media, as we've all found during this last 20-year experiment with it, that people can get very polarized, they want to dig their heels in very quickly. And what happens is they mistake social media online conversation for real life offline conversation. If you're having a conversation with someone where you're looking them in the eyes and you have a track record history with this person, in the pub, remember, on a Thursday, Friday night, you're with your work colleagues or mates at home having drinks in the pub, you can have a bit of an argument about something. And you know that it's all right, we're debating politics or whatever, we like the sound of our own voices. But you almost, I don't know if you're different to me, but you almost enjoy that kind of friction and that conversation. We're having a chat about something. But on social media, it's like, oh, we're all performing and it all feels like set in stone. And if you show weakness, then somehow you're not worthy. And so we need to get away with all that. And it's funny because we actually had the idea for this podcast where we felt that we were actually doing something that was quite opposite of that. So I wrote a piece for the Media Leader, and I write a column that goes out every 2 weeks. And as I said before, I find myself increasingly writing about AI. And in January, I wrote a piece that you actually took umbrage with. The argument basically was, I was saying that the real danger of AI isn't all these job losses that people are continually worried about. In my view, what's really dangerous is what disappears when organizations start treating human judgment, dissent, creative friction, as these sort of inefficiencies that need to be engineered away. And when that process gets optimized, that sort of messy texture goes with it. And once it's gone, you don't get it back. And in that particular piece, I use the example of the Brian Friel classic play translations, where the English went into Ireland when they colonized it and they got rid of all these Irish place names, purely because they wanted to make their maps work and to have it make sense. And when you disappear someone's language, you lose all that messiness. And frankly, you can't account for all the things that you've lost. Hamish, you disagreed with that. And tell me about why you disagreed with that.
Well, it's interesting because, was I really disagreeing with it? I suppose I was just looking at the same problem from a slightly different angle, because what I was arguing was actually what you automate first should be the absolute drudgery, not necessarily where there's any requirement for judgment or dissent or that sort of friction, because I agree with you. In that discussion or that debate around a table about some creative work, that's where the great meaning comes from. That's where the great work comes from. And I don't want to automate that away. I was arguing that actually, what if you were to automate the bits of the work that most people in media and ad agencies do, which is they're essentially turned into human APIs. They're meat APIs. They take data from one place and they push it to another place, maybe adding a tiny bit of value because, typically deterministic software struggled with the nuances of terminology and taxonomy. That's drudgery. Like automating that, there's no judgment there. There's no need for dissent or friction. Free people up from all of that stuff so that they have more time to sit around the table and discuss and be creative. Or, and this is the bit I would love people to be able to spend more time on, and I'm sure we're going to talk about the fact that it's not happening, just to look out the window and let their minds wander, because I know that when I look out of the window, when I go for a walk, that's when my most creative thoughts come. And yet people are generally not finding they have the time to do that anymore, certainly not for the last 10 or so years, because they're so busy doing human API work. So I was saying, automate that stuff, free up the time to do all the things that you want them to do as well. So I suppose we got to a place where we were just looking at the same problem from different ends. Yet when it started on the social media, the debate, I felt, certainly on my side, and I'll say this and I'll put my hands up, I probably went at you quite aggressively, just because that's the nature of social media. And as soon as I pressed send, I went, you bellend. That's not who you are. That's not who you need to be. Thankfully, you were very graceful and gracious, with your reply. And, we went offline and we had a bit back and forth. And that's where we said, all right, so you can have a sensible conversation about this with a quote unquote skeptic and a quote unquote Pollyanna. Maybe we should turn this into a podcast.
Yeah, that's essentially where the idea came from. I don't think we actually probably got to a conclusion. I think we probably still went away with it with thinking about the problem slightly differently. But that's good. And this is a big and complicated subject, and it shouldn't take one conversation to resolve that. And, the idea is that I think we'll keep coming back to the central theme about actually the things that we're automating away. How are we actually doing that cost benefit analysis of, to your point, you use the word drudgery, where I'm still skeptical about whether it all is drudgery. I'm very worried. I worry about in this mode of technology where we want to automate everything and we want to make everything as efficient as possible. I worry that people don't think enough about what they're losing, because, as I say, I'll repeat it. Once you lose it, it's very hard to get it back. But we're not going to relitigate that argument right now. That's probably going to come up in our first proper episode 1. But, on the point about genuine disagreement, I you wouldn't believe I used to have massive imposter syndrome when I used to first write opinionated columns, opinion pieces when I was at Campaign, when I was the technology editor, because I was constantly thinking, my audience knows more than me. Who the hell am I to be starting to pontificate about what I think about this, that, and the other. But what I realized after a while is that it's okay not to be a domain expert with a lot of these things, particularly in our industry where things specialize so much. But are there enough people out there asking tough questions? I don't see that. And so I saw it as a journalist as part of my responsibility to do that. And then, the whole thing when I went to the Media Leader was about institutionalizing that whole culture of journalists asking tough questions, which doesn't happen enough in our industry. And whenever I talk about the opinion pieces that I write, and they can be quite tough and I come down on one side or the other, I do quite often make a point of inviting people to tell me why I'm wrong, because long ago I accepted that I was going to be wrong and be wrong in public, but that's okay, because as long as I'm asking good questions, that's all that matters. So I think if I did come across as gracious, it's probably because I've had a lot of practice of being wrong in public.
Well, I'm hoping I'm going to have lots of opportunities to be very wrong in this podcast, and I'm looking forward to it, because I just love those sorts of discussions, and I hope our listeners, however many we have, enjoy listening to us going back and forth and learn some stuff along the way too. That's the idea of this, isn't it, really?
So let's talk about the format of how each episode is going to go. We're going to look at some big claims that people and businesses are making with regards to AI. We're going to look at these not just in the media and advertising world, but wider business as well. So Hamish, as the AI domain experts, we're going to ask you to give the strongest possible version of this claim. Really sell it to me and the audience over why you think a particular claim is going to be as transformative as the claimer thinks it's going to be. I'm then going to ask you some skeptical questions. I've been asking lots of questions for a living as a journalist, and I've been very skeptical of AI for late. So there are going to be lots to ask you. And then we're going to get into the second order effects of what's going to happen with downstream effects of this particular AI technology. What does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for the industry? What does it mean for life as we know it? Oh, maybe we won't go that far. But we're going to explore that and then get to a resolution. We're going to honestly have a conversation about this. As we say, nobody's going to win this debate, but we are going to come to a resolution about, do we believe it or not? So what do you think about that, Hamish?
Hey, I'm excited by it. I hope people listening are too. It's going to be great.
Hope so. Well, anyway, so that's the episode 0, believe it or not. Episode 1 will drop shortly afterwards. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast so you don't miss it. And but at any time, if anything we've said made you think, want to argue back at us, or just made you want to know more, we do want to hear from you. Email us either to hamish@goagentflow.com or to me, Omar, at oomph.com. We'll read everything, and if your question is good enough, it might even end up in the show. Or find us on LinkedIn. I'm Omar Oakes, he's Hamish Nicklin. And also subscribe to my Substack. This is doing plugs, adverse reactions, is it? Hamish has a Substack too. What's your Substack?
God, I can't remember. I think it's Wine Husband.
Wine Husband. We'll get into why it's called that in the next episode as well. And if you want to see what Agent Flow is actually building, it's goagentflow.com. Anyway, that's enough. I'm going to stop talking. Thanks, Hamish. See you next week.
Cheers. Bye-bye.